The sound of shattering glass and frantic screams pierced the stillness of the night as Sarah's world came crashing down. She had been sitting at the kitchen table, enjoying a quiet evening with her husband John, when a barrage of gunfire suddenly erupted outside their home. Instinctively, Sarah dropped to the floor, pulling John down with her. But it was too late. He had been struck by multiple bullets, his body convulsing in a pool of crimson. Sarah cradled him in her arms, frantically calling for an ambulance, but the life was already slipping from his eyes. "Hold on, John. Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. But his labored breathing soon faded, and the light in his eyes grew dim, extinguished forever. Sarah's anguished cries echoed through the empty house, her heart shattering into a million pieces. In that moment, the woman she had been, loving, compassionate, full of hope, died alongside her husband. In her place, a new Sarah emerged, one driven by a singular, consuming purpose: revenge. As the police investigation unfolded, Sarah learned that John had been caught in the crossfire of a brutal gang war. The intended targets were members of a rival faction, but her beloved husband had been an innocent victim, his life snuffed out in an instant of senseless violence. Fury burned in Sarah's veins, fueling a determination that would not be quelled. She knew the police would do their best to bring the perpetrators to justice, but Sarah's thirst for vengeance went beyond the confines of the law. She wanted the men responsible to suffer, to feel the same agony that now consumed her very being. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's grief transformed into an unrelenting obsession. She pored over news reports, combed through police records, and sought out any scrap of information that could lead her to the gang members who had shattered her life. Her once vibrant spirit was consumed by a darkness that would not be extinguished. As her loved ones watched in dismay, Sarah withdrew from the world, her focus laser-sharp and unwavering. She knew she was outmatched, outgunned by the ruthless gang, but that only steeled her resolve. Quietly, methodically, she began to acquire weapons and tactical gear, training herself in the art of combat. Gone was the carefree, compassionate woman John had adored. In her place stood a hardened warrior, her eyes glinting with a dangerous determination. She would stop at nothing to bring those responsible for her husband's murder to their knees, to make them feel the full weight of her wrath. The transformation alarmed Sarah's family and friends, who pleaded with her to let the justice system handle the matter. But their words fell on deaf ears. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. Her husband's blood cried out for vengeance, and she would answer that call, no matter the cost. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's preparations intensified. She honed her combat skills, mastering firearms and hand-to-hand techniques with a single-minded focus. Her home became a fortress, filled with an arsenal of weapons and tactical gear. And all the while, the fire of her vengeance burned brighter, fueled by the memory of John's lifeless body in her arms. The stage was set for a reckoning, a clash of wills between a grieving widow and the ruthless gang that had taken everything from her. Sarah was ready to unleash her own brand of justice, whatever the consequences may be. The final stand was about to begin. Sarah's transformation from grieving widow to calculating warrior did not go unnoticed by her loved ones. Her sister, Emily, watched in growing alarm as Sarah's once gentle demeanor hardened, her eyes burning with a fierce determination that bordered on obsession. "Sarah, please, you have to stop this," Emily pleaded, her voice laced with concern. "What you're doing, it's not going to bring John back. I'm afraid you're going to get yourself killed." But Sarah's mind was made up. She had already made the fateful decision to take matters into her own hands, and nothing her sister said could sway her. The men responsible for John's murder had to pay, and she would be the one to extract that payment. "I have to do this, Emily," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For John. For us. I can't just sit back and let them get away with this." Her gaze was unwavering, her resolve unshakable. Reluctantly, Emily realized that she could not talk Sarah out of her quest for vengeance. Sensing the futility of her pleas, she resigned herself to providing whatever support and protection she could, even if it meant enabling Sarah's dangerous path. Alone in her home, Sarah immersed herself in a rigorous regimen of combat training. She studied tactical manuals, honed her marksmanship skills, and conditioned her body to reach peak physical performance. Her days were a blur of intense workouts, weapons practice, and meticulous planning. As she pushed herself to the limits, Sarah's body transformed, her once slender frame hardening into that of a seasoned fighter. Gone were the delicate features of the woman John had adored. In their place, a hardened, uncompromising warrior emerged, her eyes narrowed with laser-like focus. Alongside her physical transformation, Sarah also began to acquire an impressive arsenal of weapons. She scoured the black market, using her connections and resources to amass an array of firearms, tactical gear, and other tools of her deadly trade. Her home became a veritable fortress, a testament to her unwavering determination. In the quiet moments, when the weight of her actions threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah would pause and gaze at a framed photograph of her and John, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. It was a constant reminder of what she had lost, and what she was willing to risk to avenge his senseless murder. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's preparations intensified. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but the thought of her husband's killers escaping justice only fueled her resolve. She was ready to unleash her own brand of vengeance, whatever the cost. The stage was set for a confrontation unlike any other, a clash between a grieving widow and the ruthless gang that had torn her life apart. Sarah's transformation was complete, and she was poised to strike, her warrior's arsenal at the ready. With her arsenal of weapons and her combat skills honed to perfection, Sarah knew that the time had come to put her plan into action. She had spent weeks painstakingly gathering intelligence on the gang responsible for her husband's murder, and now she was ready to take the fight directly to them. Donning a disguise, Sarah infiltrated the gang's territory, blending seamlessly into the shadows as she navigated the labyrinth of back alleys and abandoned buildings. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination, but she refused to let her resolve waver. As she moved through the gang's territory, Sarah observed their movements, studied their routines, and identified potential weaknesses in their operations. She listened intently to their conversations, committing every scrap of information to memory, all the while maintaining her cover as an unassuming bystander. It was a delicate dance, this game of subterfuge, and Sarah knew that a single misstep could cost her dearly. But the need for vengeance burned within her, fueling her courage and sharpening her senses. One day, as Sarah was scouting a known gathering place for the gang, she caught the eye of the group's ruthless leader, a man known only by his moniker, the Viper. His gaze lingered on her, and Sarah felt a trickle of fear, but she held his stare, her expression schooled into one of casual indifference. To her surprise, the Viper approached her, his lips curled into a predatory smile. "You're new around here, aren't you?" he asked, his voice laced with a menacing undercurrent. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm just passing through," she replied, her tone measured and detached. The Viper's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Sarah feared that her cover had been blown. But then, to her astonishment, he gestured towards her and said, "You've got potential, girl. How would you like to join my crew?" Sarah's mind raced as she weighed her options. This was a dangerous game she was playing, but the opportunity to infiltrate the gang's inner circle was too tempting to pass up. Swallowing her trepidation, she nodded slowly and said, "I'm listening." Thus began Sarah's perilous journey into the heart of the enemy's lair. With her life hanging in the balance, she would have to navigate a treacherous web of lies, manipulation, and brutality, all the while keeping her true intentions hidden from the ruthless gang leader, who now considered her a potential recruit. The final confrontation was drawing near, and Sarah knew that she would have to be at the top of her game if she were to survive and deliver the vengeance she sought. As Sarah's infiltration of the gang's inner circle deepened, she found herself walking a tightrope of deception, constantly on guard to maintain her carefully crafted facade. The Viper, the ruthless gang leader, had taken a liking to her, and she used this to her advantage, skillfully manipulating him and gaining access to sensitive information. With each passing day, Sarah's knowledge of the gang's operations grew, and she meticulously plotted her next moves. The time for action was drawing near, and she knew that the element of surprise would be crucial to her success. One night, as the gang gathered for a meeting, Sarah quietly slipped away, using her newfound knowledge to target the gang's most vulnerable members. In a series of calculated strikes, she struck swiftly and with deadly precision, taking out key lieutenants and disrupting the organization's delicate balance. The gang was thrown into chaos, with members frantically searching for the elusive assailant. The Viper, his confidence shaken, grew increasingly paranoid, lashing out at his own men in a desperate attempt to root out the traitor in their midst. Sarah watched the events unfold with a grim satisfaction, knowing that her plan was unfolding perfectly. She had become the hunter, and the gang was now the prey. But as the pressure mounted, the gang's desperation only intensified. They unleashed a relentless manhunt, scouring the streets and employing ruthless tactics to flush out their mysterious adversary. Sarah found herself constantly on the move, evading the gang's pursuit and carefully covering her tracks. She had to be one step ahead at all times, anticipating their every move and staying just out of their reach. The game of cat and mouse became increasingly perilous, with Sarah's life hanging by a thread. She could feel the noose tightening around her, the gang's resources and manpower slowly overwhelming her own. In a moment of desperation, Sarah realized that she could no longer continue her solo crusade. She needed help, and she knew exactly where to find it. Among the other victims of the gang's crimes, those who had also been left shattered and seeking justice. Reaching out to these unexpected allies, Sarah began to formulate a bold plan, one that would put everything on the line in a final climactic confrontation with the Viper and his gang. The stage was set for a showdown that would determine the fate of not just Sarah, but an entire community scarred by the gang's ruthless reign. As the relentless pursuit by the gang continued, Sarah knew that she could no longer rely solely on her own skills and resources. The noose was tightening, and she needed a way to even the odds if she was to have any chance of emerging victorious. It was then that Sarah remembered the other victims of the gang's crimes, those whose lives had been torn apart just like hers. She had witnessed their pain and anger firsthand during her time among the gang, and she realized that they shared a common enemy. Reaching out cautiously, Sarah began to make contact with these unexpected allies, carefully sounding them out and assessing their willingness to join her in the fight against the Viper and his gang. To her surprise, she found a deep well of resentment and a thirst for vengeance that mirrored her own. These were ordinary people: a grieving mother, a small business owner, a young man whose brother had been gunned down, all of them scarred by the gang's ruthless actions. One by one, Sarah brought them into her confidence, outlining her daring plan to take down the Viper and cripple the gang's operations. At first, there was skepticism and fear, but as Sarah painted a vivid picture of the justice they could achieve, their resolve began to harden. Together, they formulated a bold strategy, pooling their resources and skills to create a formidable force that could challenge the gang's dominance. Sarah provided the tactical expertise and combat training, while her newfound allies contributed crucial intelligence, logistical support, and a burning desire for retribution. As they worked tirelessly to prepare for the final confrontation, the bonds between them grew stronger. They were no longer just a disparate group of victims. They had become a tight-knit team, united in their determination to bring down the Viper and his gang once and for all. The risks were immense, and none of them could ignore the very real possibility that they might not survive the coming clash. But the promise of justice, of reclaiming their lives from the gang's stranglehold, was too powerful to ignore. With a shared sense of purpose and a willingness to sacrifice everything, Sarah and her allies steeled themselves for the ultimate showdown. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the gang's empire, and they were ready to face whatever consequences might come. The tension in the air was palpable as Sarah and her unlikely allies gathered, finalizing the details of their bold plan. They knew that the coming confrontation with the Viper and his gang would be a do-or-die moment, a clash that would determine the fate of not just themselves, but the entire community they were fighting for. Sarah's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination as she reviewed the operation one last time, checking and rechecking every aspect to ensure that nothing had been left to chance. She had spent months honing her skills and preparing for this moment, but she also knew that the stakes had never been higher. As the team moved into position, Sarah could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had trained them well, and she had faith in their abilities, but the sheer force of the gang they were up against was a daunting prospect. The Viper and his men were ruthless, hardened by years of criminal activity and violence. They would not go down without a fight, and Sarah knew that they would use every tactic at their disposal to emerge victorious. The sound of gunfire erupted, shattering the stillness of the night as the confrontation unfolded. Sarah and her allies fought with a desperate ferocity, their skills and training put to the ultimate test. They knew that there was no room for error, no second chances. The battle raged on, a chaotic blur of flying bullets, shattering glass, and the cries of the wounded. Sarah moved with a deadly precision, her weapon an extension of her body, as she targeted the gang's most dangerous members. Her allies fought alongside her, their resolve unwavering in the face of the overwhelming onslaught. As the dust began to settle, Sarah could feel the toll of the battle weighing heavily on her. Her body ached, her muscles burning with the strain of the intense combat, but she refused to give in, her gaze fixed on the Viper, who had managed to evade capture thus far. With a final, desperate push, Sarah and her allies converged on the gang leader, a storm of fury and vengeance unleashed upon him. The Viper fought back with a primal ferocity, but he was outmatched, his arrogance and overconfidence finally betraying him. In the end, it was Sarah who delivered the final blow, her weapon raised in a righteous act of retribution. As the Viper crumpled to the ground, his life slipping away, Sarah felt a sense of grim satisfaction, but also a profound sorrow for the price that had been paid. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. Sarah and her allies had survived the final confrontation, but they were battered and bruised, their lives forever changed by the events that had unfolded. As they surveyed the aftermath, a sense of both triumph and anguish hung in the air. The long-sought justice had been served, but at what personal cost? In the eerie silence that followed the final confrontation, Sarah stood amidst the rubble, her eyes fixed on the lifeless body of the Viper. The man who had taken everything from her now lay at her feet, a victim of her own hard-won vengeance. But as the adrenaline rush faded, Sarah felt a deep, gnawing sense of emptiness. She had achieved her goal, the justice she had craved so desperately, yet the void left by her husband's death remained unfilled. Turning her gaze to her allies, Sarah saw the same conflicted emotions etched upon their faces. They had risked everything to bring down the Viper and his gang, but the victory had come at a heavy price. Loved ones had been lost, lives had been irrevocably changed, and the scars of their ordeal would linger long after the dust had settled. As they gathered the remnants of their shattered lives, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if the path she had chosen had been the right one. Had her quest for vengeance come at too great a cost? Had she become as ruthless and uncompromising as the very enemy she had sought to destroy? The questions tormented her, gnawing at her conscience and threatening to unravel the fragile sense of purpose that had sustained her through the darkest days. In the solitude of her home, Sarah would sit for hours, staring at the framed photograph of her and John, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. She had avenged his death, but at what price? Had she truly honored his memory, or had she become a twisted reflection of the darkness that had taken him from her? The weight of her actions, the consequences of her choices, began to take a toll on her psyche. Sarah found herself wrestling with a newfound sense of guilt and uncertainty, questioning the morality of her actions and the legacy she had left behind. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah's allies slowly drifted apart, each dealing with the trauma in their own way. Some found solace in the knowledge that they had fought for a righteous cause, while others struggled to reconcile the violence they had witnessed and the lives they had taken. For Sarah, the journey towards healing and acceptance proved to be the most arduous. She had poured her very soul into the quest for vengeance, and now she was left to grapple with the consequences of her actions and the weight of her own choices. The path forward was uncertain, and Sarah knew that the scars left by her ordeal would never fully heal. But as she contemplated the future, a glimmer of hope began to emerge, a realization that true justice might lie not in vengeance, but in the ability to move forward, to find meaning and purpose in the ashes of her former life. As the months passed, the ripples of Sarah's quest for vengeance continued to be felt throughout the community. The confrontation with the Viper and his gang had left an indelible mark, both on those who had taken part and on the lives they had touched. For Sarah, the journey towards healing and acceptance proved to be a long and arduous one. The weight of her actions, the consequences of her choices, continued to haunt her, casting a shadow over her every waking moment. She found herself grappling with a deep sense of guilt, questioning the morality of the path she had chosen and the toll it had taken on those around her. The violence she had witnessed and the lives she had taken, even in the name of justice, had left an indelible stain on her soul. Yet, as Sarah slowly rebuilt the fragmented pieces of her life, she began to realize that her quest for vengeance had also inspired others. The unexpected allies who had joined her in the final confrontation had each been forever changed by the experience, their own lives and perspectives forever altered. Some had found a newfound sense of purpose, channeling their grief and anger into positive change within the community. They worked tirelessly to support victims of crime, to advocate for stronger laws and better resources, all in the hope of preventing others from experiencing the same devastating loss. Others struggled to come to terms with the violence they had been a part of, wrestled with the moral implications of their actions. But even in their darkest moments, they drew strength from the knowledge that they had stood up to the tyranny of the gang, that they had fought for a greater good. As Sarah watched these developments unfold, she realized that her story had become a testament to the power of resilience, the transformative nature of collective action, and the complex nature of justice itself. She had set out on a personal quest for vengeance, but in the end, her legacy had become something far greater, a touchstone for a community scared by violence, but unwilling to succumb to it. In the quiet moments, when the weight of her past threatened to overwhelm her, Sarah would find solace in the knowledge that her husband's memory lived on, not just in her own heart, but in the lives of those she had inspired. The vengeance she had sought had been tempered by the realization that true justice lies not in retribution, but in the ability to create positive change, to build a better future from the ashes of the past. Sarah's story had become a haunting, bittersweet legacy, a testament to the power of the human spirit, the capacity for both darkness and light, and the enduring strength of the bonds that can form, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy.